Hello everyone, this is Joe Brewer here. I'm the founder of Earth Regenerators, and today I want to share something very special, which is that the Earth Regenerators community has evolved to the point where we're ready to make our first great transition from a profoundly engaging global community to something that's capable of achieving the mission that it was set up for. And you'll see in the next few minutes that this is a very special moment indeed. I want to begin by saying that the birth of Earth Regenerators was humble and small. On December 31st of 2019, entering into the new year of 2020, I was writing the manuscript of a book, and I said out to the world, would anyone like to join a study group and behave as though we're a free design school for learning how to regenerate the Earth? Very quickly, several thousand people joined the community, and we started a process of beginning to explore how to create decentralized governance. And from this decentralized governance grew an explosion of pro-social groups. There are more than 20 active groups in Earth Regenerators right now, led by different people with different teams with different focus. And this explosion of pro-social groups enabled us to hold a series of learning journeys in the last 18 months, bringing people deep into relationship with each other, feeding back to the pro-social groups themselves, and creating an online culture that can honestly be called a community. In parallel with this, we began creating a Barichara regeneration fund for the work that's based in Colombia in the village of Barichara, and an Earth Regenerators Fund for members of this community to support each other in making life changes. And so not only did we create decentralized governance, we started to grow something bigger and more powerful through this global community. But underneath it all, we were quietly laying the groundwork for a real-world prototype to embody the purpose of Earth regeneration at a scale worthy of the times that we're living in. And we're going to talk about that real-world prototype today to show you that Earth Regenerators is moving into an entirely new domain of existence. But of course, it's important before we go there to mention that through the network of activities, especially in the last year, we gave birth to two key focus areas: a regenerative project incubator and a group of people learning how to be bioregional catalysts, to explore the complexity of their own territories and to learn how to share from one bioregion to another. And in the process, through the support of the Earth Regenerators Fund, they began exploring how to create an emergent form of governance and finance, a way of making decisions, allocating resources, and supporting each other in their lives in the real world. And this has created a tension and a divergence and a need to create clarity and separation. And this is where we enter the new beginning. In this new beginning, I, as the founder and the initial leader of Earth Regenerators, will depart from leadership entirely and pass on leadership to the emerging governance that's been taking form. And in parallel with this, the Earth Regenerators community will continue in its work. And I will place myself into the real-world prototype, the place where we're trying to create an on-the-ground manifestation of a regenerative bioregion. You see, a few months ago, we made it clear that we are birthing a regenerative bioregion in the village of Barichara, Colombia. And as I've said many times, Barichara is profoundly situated to become a living laboratory for regenerative economics at the territorial scale. And we are ready to deeply focus inward and manifest this for the world. We've already created a regenerative trust for the Barichara Ecoversity. A number of people have joined a pledge community by pledging $1,000 to help birth this living prototype. And this pledge community is already beginning to learn together how they can participate from around the world with the depth and the nuance of what's happening on the ground in Colombia. What this means in practical terms is that the Earth Regenerators community needs to begin a transition process of creating its own governance council. And in the meantime, the Barichara ecoversity that is already being born will begin to take a clear and distinct path separate from this governance council, because I will not be a member of it. And you see, the Barichara ecoversity is so complex already. It's comprised of a network of learning centers. We're in the process of creating a territorial foundation, and we are focusing on regenerating 500,000 hectares of land. The complexity of this is so great that it's going to take all of my attention moving forward. What this means is that it is time for me to move into a new phase of my life. And I'm going to need to hand off the learning journeys that I've been leading with host teams for the last 18 months. I'll need to hand those off to other ER members. And I want to explain why this work is so complex that it's going to demand all of my attention. Last week, we were visited by Willem Verweerde of Common Land Foundation, which is based in Holland. I like to describe Common Land as one of the best practitioners for leading the design of regeneration at the scale of entire landscapes. Common Land Foundation began in 2012 with 4 landscapes, each landscape more than 100,000 hectares in size. They recruited the resources, summing in tens of millions of dollars, to provide ongoing support to 4 entire landscapes over the span of at least 20 years. When they started this work, they had the vision that they would expand out to at least 50 more landscapes, that while they wouldn't be able to support them in their entirety, they'd be able to collaborate together to mobilize resources and to build capacities and share learnings. Right now, we are in the process of forming a relationship to become one of those 50 landscapes here in Barichara. And this is part of a much, much larger vision, partnering with another group called Eco-Agricultural Partners, to eventually spread to 1,000 landscapes. Now, those of you who have studied bioregionalism will know that the estimated numbers of bioregions in the world range from about 500 to 2,000, depending how they're measured, which means 1,000 landscapes spans the planet. This is a planetary scale movement that we are already a part of, and we're going to formally enter through a collaboration with Common Land if we're successful at establishing our work here in Barichara. And this is related to the vision that is articulated at the heart of Earth Regenerators, which is to create bioregional networks of regeneration on every continent on Earth. In practical terms, this means that we don't need to birth every bioregion on Earth. Common Land Foundation is already working with 15, and if Barichara joins them, we'll be number 16, which means we will join an existing network of bioregions simply by collaborating with them. And that says nothing of what the work is that's emerging in bioregional catalysts, for example, in Barichara and also in Osa Peninsula in Costa Rica, 2 places that are already very active in the Earth Regenerators community. But I need to focus myself on the Barichara ecoversity. Last week, we received the wonderful news that we finally have the money secure to complete the purchase of the land where we will locate the Barichara ecoversity, which means we have a foundational asset anchored to a territory, connected to 30 or more existing regenerative projects, and we're 2 years in to weaving and integrating them to do holistic work at the landscape scale. And now that we are securing this land to begin the work of forming the Barichara ecoversity in earnest, I need to devote myself fully to this effort. And to help you understand what this means in practical terms, I want to borrow a model developed by Common Land that shows how big and how sophisticated this really is. What they did is they created a map, a visual representation for how to prioritize investment to regenerate entire landscapes at large scales, scales of 100,000 hectares or more. The vertical axis here is the level of investment that is needed. The horizontal axis is time. And they found that for any landscape to work at such large scales, you're working for a minimum of 20 years. And honestly, it's more likely to be 50 years or more. This is also the scale of many large-scale infrastructure projects like intercity rail or putting in a power plant. Projects of this scale are always planned on timeframes of 20 years or larger. And what they found at the Common Land Foundation is that to do holistic landscape management at such large scales, there's a need to create a commons of supporting a core team with funding for a minimum of 20 years. Imagine having 15 people in a bioregion fully funded for 20 years. This is the minimum. Without this, you can't even begin doing bioregional regeneration. On top of this core team, they found that there's a need to support regenerative projects that are not financially viable. What this means in practical terms is that philanthropy, angel investment, or other forms of financial support need to be given to these projects prior to any consideration of business models that work. And this is because together the core team that holds the process of territorial regeneration is able to support the ongoing evolution of networks of regenerative projects across a large-scale landscape. And only after 8 to 10 years does a regenerative economy begin to form where businesses organized around regeneration are able to be self-supporting and create revenue. And it's at this point that the economy begins to grow, with the population of regenerative projects creating regenerative markets. This is the place that groups like Regen Network are trying to get to when they talk about eco-credits for agroforestry models that replace industrial agriculture. And you'll notice, those of you who have been involved in agroforestry, that fruit-bearing trees like mangoes and cacao and others that are commonly used in agroforestry systems take 5 to 8 years to start producing their first viable, commercially productive crops, which means investments are needed in the first 5 years, and then to cover those investments takes several years more, and only after 8 to 10 years do they become financially viable. And at that point, the regenerative economy begins to take off. And only after the regenerative economy begins to take off do local governments and other actors begin to realize what this model is and that it actually is to their benefit to support it, and you begin to have local councils, local planning offices, local governments. They begin to ride on top of the beginnings and the supports of the regenerative economy. Now notice how this model has a gap where for a minimum of 8 years, there is no return on financial investment in monetary terms. This is called the Valley of Death by investors of large-scale infrastructure projects, because this is the place where regenerative projects die if they don't have continuing support because there's not a market that can support them. And for me to help build such a complex model and manifest it in the bioregion of Barichara, I have a lot of work to do here. I want to talk a little bit about this core team, because in practice, with Common Land's 15 territories that they work in, they found that the core team needs about $500,000 per year over the span of 20 years. So you can do the math. That's $10 million minimum just to begin the work, just to know that the process can be held. Why is this so important? Because this core team does not support projects. They hold the process, the way that a host will hold the space of a dinner party to be sure everything goes well. By holding the process for the span of 20 years, they continually gestate, incubate, and transform the existing projects. This is what manages the risk. This is what makes investment, whether it's philanthropic or business, this is what makes the risk possible to be managed, is that there's a core team holding the process. And if there's a management of risk of the entire territory, this is what makes holism possible. Instead of having fragmented projects focused on little pieces and no one can focus on the whole, there's a core team that's continually holding the whole while all of those projects are doing their part to manifest its parts. This means we need to create the investment instrument for large-scale landscape regeneration. Many of you have heard me talk about funding the Barichara Ecoversity without this level of clarity, because we weren't ready to begin until we could anchor ourselves to the land of the ecoversity. Now that we can anchor ourselves to that land, and we already have a core team doing the work on a voluntary basis, which is not sustainable, it's time to raise the funds and build the capacity to support that core team for the next 20 years. I want to give you a glimpse of what our territory looks like. This is a three-dimensional relief map of the northern Andes in Colombia. And the place where Barichara is focused is this area, 500,000 hectares of integrated landscape, bound by 3 lines of mountain ranges with a plateau inside. One of the first things I learned when I arrived here in 2019 is that there is a well-defined regional climate system within the rotation of air and the formation of weather inside this boundary, defining the 500,000 hectares of land. And it's in this place that the entire territory is currently in the process of becoming a desert. So one of the large-scale outcomes of regenerating this territory is to reverse desertification and to design for beneficial regional climate change, to protect the local ecology, and to establish security for continuity of the traditional cultural lifeways of this bioregion. Many of you have read my book, The Design Pathway for Regenerating Earth, and some of you may not. What I want to say is that this book was the basis of Earth Regenerators. We started as a study group reading its chapters. And it tells us what Earth Regenerators is for. Earth Regenerators is for giving birth to regenerative bioregions, exactly like this one in Colombia. And when I wrote the text for the back cover of the book, this is what I said. A planet-wide network of learning ecosystems is needed that can hold the complexity of birthing these regenerative bioregions during and after the rest of the collapse that we were all born into. So the purpose of Earth Regenerators is to hold the complexity of birthing these regenerative bioregions. And we're already birthing our first in Barichara. And we're more than 2.5 years in. So back to what I said before, that as the Earth Regenerators separates into its own governance council, and I move into focusing on the work of the Barichara Ecoversity, we need to begin a transition process where existing governance capacities become clear and formulated as a governance council. This means other members of ER need to take over or transform the learning journeys so that they can continue, because the learning journeys have been a backbone of building relationships, a key entry point for new people into the community to form friendships and to learn how to navigate the increasingly complex landscape of the Earth Regenerators community. At the same time, this governance council needs to evolve a regenerative finance system. There's already been a governance group for the ER fund exploring this for about 8 months. And they need to evolve this into a fully functioning regenerative finance system. All the while, they need to grow in parallel with what is happening in Barichara. And they need to replicate what we are doing in Barichara into other bioregions, which is one of the key purposes of bioregional catalysts, is to learn how to catalyze the weaving of human relationships, the mapping of territories, the telling of stories of place, all of the things that the bioregional catalysts have been practicing for about a year now. And one thing that's really important to say is, while I was leading the learning journeys of Earth Regenerators before, I was in a bit of a conflicted state because I was living a different learning journey at the same time. My personal learning journey. And what I want to say is all who come to Earth Regenerators can join the learnings that are there. And those who want to join me can join my personal learning journey, which is the creating of this living prototype in a real-world landscape. And there are two ways currently you can join. You can attend the weekly Barichara updates that take place on Thursday mornings at 11 a.m. Central Time US, and you could join the pledge community that is making all of this possible so that we can do this work and support the core team and the network of learning centers that are already happening here. What's going to become increasingly clear is that the learning journeys of Earth Regenerators are about building the global capacity to catalyze and birth new bioregions. And in parallel with this, there will be a massive learning journey focused on Barichara itself. And this learning journey, which began formally on December 3rd of 2020, when we announced the launch of the Barichara Regeneration Fund work group, and began raising money to buy the first piece of land in Barichara, and supported the creation of a fund that catalyzed and transformed 15 regenerative projects in the region. This project has already been going for nearly 2 years. It just wasn't clear how to separate it from the rest of Earth Regenerators until now. I call this the first great transition, the great transition, because it is birthing something qualitatively new. Just like the shift from prokaryotic cells to eukaryotic cells, where the complexity of life, which is immense for a single-celled organism without organelles, is absolutely transformed by the complexity of a clustering of organelles within a eukaryotic cell, which enabled an evolutionary leap in the history of life on our planet, because eukaryotic cells enable greater complexity and intelligence. In exactly the same way, Earth Regenerators is moving from its prokaryotic state to its eukaryotic state, the place where it stops being a single integrated whole and it becomes a nested network of modules and relationships with interdependencies, enabling much more complex intelligence to occur. This is the first great transition, because we're going to need to replicate this for many other bioregions, not just Barichara, because we need to do this all over the planet. So while Earth Regenerators is already giving birth to the Barichara ecoversity, and the ecoversity is already bringing a lot of learnings back to the Earth Regenerators community, it's now time to clarify that one of the key purposes of the Barichara ecoversity is to nurture other bioregions as it relates to the Earth Regenerators community, so that Earth Regenerators can replicate this and give birth to other bioregional projects. The capacity for this already exists in nascent form, because we have the Earth Regenerators Fund connected to bioregional catalysts, connected to a project incubator. And they together represent the primordial egg for a governance council and a regenerative finance system. The invitation for all of you is from this moment forward to help make this happen. You can respond in whatever way your heart feels called, whether it's to join the pledge community and help support that core team and help us find the way to raise the funds to support Barichara for a minimum of 20 years, or to just join the Barichara updates and learn along with us and bring it to wherever you are, or to join a learning journey in Earth Regenerators and form relationships there, or to help create and clarify this governance council and regenerative finance system that can birth the global network of bioregional learning centers, which was the whole point all along. Thank you for listening this far. I'm glad you're here. Share any comments you have in the thread below. And it's time. Let's make this happen. Onward, fellow humans.